Now let's talk about the stereo workflow in Flame. There were a lot of interesting new features that evolved with the introduction of stereoscopy into the application. Like the introduction of mixed resolutions and OpenEXR workflows, almost every tool in Flame's workflow needed to be taken into consideration. Probably the most significant change was the introduction of the FBX camera directly into the Action module. In Flame 2011, Action adopted the same camera model as Maya. This provides better camera exchange between Maya and Flame via the FBX format because the parameters now map one-to-one. The other big introduction was that of the stereo object. And finally, the monitoring. Under the Broadcast Monitor menu in the Preferences pages, you'll now find different options, anaglyph, interlaced, as well as dual output for left and right eye monitoring. So now let's talk about working with Flame's tools in a stereo workflow. Here on the desktop you can see I have a clip that has an indication that it's a stereo clip. It has an S here, much the same way as we represent clip history on a clip on the desktop. Let's go into the player and we can start playing this clip. Notice that it has an overlay of both a left and a right eye. That's because this particular footage was shot with a parallel stereo rig. You can also see that we can display that on our monitor in stereo if you're using the anaglyph mode and using anaglyph glasses. There's a pop-up here that you can see where we can turn stereo off or we can turn it on with different options. So let's say we wanted to use some of Flame's tools to work on this particular stereo footage, which is again represented as one clip on the desktop, but is actually made up of both the left and right eye clips. Let's say we wanted to auto-stabilize this. We can take this clip into batch as we normally would, and we can pull tools out of the tool chest as we normally would as well. But if I bring an auto-stabilize, it only has one input, and notice that the stereo clip has two outputs representing one for the left and one for the right eye. So taking that into consideration, we've reworked the tools inside of the batch module to work in stereo. The hotkey is Shift and S, and as we pull any of the tools out, they're already made automatically for you to work with stereo clips. So now we have two inputs on our auto stabilize. Let's go ahead and use the tools to go ahead and parent the left eye into one of those inputs. You could also use a mat, notice, and you could also put the right eye into the other input. Let's set the duration of our timeline. Let's go back now and let's give the correct duration to the auto stabilize node, and we'll bring up the result view and analyze. And just as you normally would with using the tools in batch for mono clips, you can see that the auto stabilizer is following the movement of the background and putting a lot of tracker marks all over that backplate. Let's go ahead and split the views. We'll put the result of that on the left. Let's set a context on the original footage and put that on the left, and we'll have our result on the right. And now let's go ahead and play that back. And as I play that back, you can see that Flame, even though it's working in stereo mode, has automatically done the auto stabilize for us, once for the left and right eye simultaneously. And of course we can use the tools as we normally would, and now we can go ahead and stabilize that shot. Alright, so that's a good look at how the tools are stereo ready. But let's talk about now the other types of acquisition. So that was that particular clip was shot with a parallel rig, and we have both the left and the right eye. But let's talk about working with a format like red. So if we're working with red, there's a different type of acquisition acquisition method that's used. So in this case, they're actually using a beam splitter. So what we see here is the left and the right eyes, but the right eye is actually shot with a mirror, so it's actually flipped. So we need to deal with that in a different way. We can also actually lock these clips together here on the desktop so you can see that we can easily kind of compare them and see that they are actually in fact in sync. So if we kind of scrub through these clips, you can see that they do have the same time code. Let's unlock those clips and go back into batch, where I'll bring them in to the batch environment and start to put them together. So of course batch has all the tools that you know and love for procedural compositing. So here I can take out the flip node, and we can actually just flip that around vertically, and now we've solved the issue of our mirrored camera. Let's go ahead and start to do some more corrections. Let's say we want to change the color of this particular of these plates. So back to our color tab here, with Shift S I'm going to bring the color warper, again stereo color warper, out to start to work with these plates. So let's take the front from that and our flipped result into the right eye, and we can start to work with some color correction. So here we'll start to expand the whites a bit. We can add in some more saturation, maybe adjust the black levels, also adjust our gamma curves a bit, so we can take the left and the right eye up simultaneously to go ahead and make that adjustment. So that looks really good. And now we have our color correction applied to both the left and the right eyes. Next we want to apply a composite. So I'm going to go back to the tool bin and grab an action node, and again with Shift S I'm going to pull the action out, and you can see that now we see that we have an action stereo object here in our batch schematic. And what's great about doing pulling action out in stereo is it's automatically set up for us. So if we look in the schematic view, you can see that we've now automatically got the FBX camera, which you can see is one of the objects now in the action object bin. And if we double click on that camera, you can see that we have, under basics, we have the camera set to stereo mode, and of course our output is also going to be in stereo. So this is really kind of a setup for us where everything's ready to go. And of course I just want to mention that we also can work with the FBX camera in mono mode as well. So that's really good. The next thing I'm going to do is go back and introduce the two layers that are coming out of the color warper. Let's go ahead and put those into action. So let's add a couple of media layers, and we'll pipe the left eye into layer 1 and the right eye into layer 2. And let's also take our background and put that into action as well, because we're going to need to resize this particular plate, where default is at 1920 by 1080. So let's go ahead and set to the background resolution. So that's working pretty well. The only issue that we have now is that both of these objects have been brought into the system in as images, and that's not what we want. We're going to go ahead and delete the images that were introduced automatically, and let's turn the background off. When we reselect the two layers here in the media layer list, we'll go to the Surfaces tab on the right, and you can see that inside of the Surfaces bin is a new object, the stereo object. And this is a really powerful tool that works within Action to automatically help you deal with the left and right eye images as they get combined in front of our new FBX camera. So let's add that into our scene and take a look at the stereo object. So we've got our FBX camera, it's set to stereo. We've got our stereo object here, and you can see that right away we've also got our output set to anaglyph. So you can see that we've got different options. There's options to actually blend, to help to blend the images, see the differences in the clamped image, and so on. But let's leave this in anaglyph Dubois so that on our monitor we can put on our anaglyph glasses and we can actually see this stereo representation. Now on the stereo object you'll see there's different tabs. Like a DVE object, it's a construction with multiple tools built into it. So this is going to help in terms of efficiency, allow us to quickly access the tools needed to make our various corrections. Without making any other changes to the left and the right eye other than dealing with the convergence, notice that, and with this construction, we're recreating the way that this was actually shot on the day that it was shot with through that stereo rig. And we can actually play around with the convergence. And in other words, we can reconverge what was already recorded with the camera in the stereo object. It's baked into this image, this 2D image, but I can go in and I can start to play around with the convergence. So I won't do that too dramatically for those of you with your glasses on, but you can see that I'll do it holding down the space bar to kind of subtly change it. But you can see that we've got the ability to go into this already baked in recorded imagery with the left and the right eye that came from the field, and we can make these convergence changes so that we can really reconverge and decide where we want to focus on, which plane in this image do we want to focus the camera or refocus the camera as we change the convergence. So that's a very important part of this particular scene, of this particular workflow, excuse me. And if we go into the top view, let's look at our FBX camera from above. You can see that not only can we change the convergence on the stereo object for what's already baked into the scene, but we can go back to our camera stereo menu here. We can, depending on the type of camera that we want to use, we can use parallel or converged here, and they have different effects. So here, if I adjust the interaxial field, you can see that we can adjust the convergence of the camera this way on the FBX camera itself, either in parallel mode or, notice, in converged mode, we get a different type of convergence. So again, all of these considerations were brought in when we had to introduce the stereo workflow. So the next thing we want to talk about is starting to add other types of elements into our scene. So we have our stereo object. It has its own baked-in properties, its own convergence already set. But the great thing about Flame's stereo workflow is that we can introduce mono images as well as 3D objects. So any kind of mixing and matching of the various types of stereo objects, stereo footage with mono objects is possible within action in front of the new FBX camera. So let's have a look at how that might work. Let's introduce a 3D text. Let's just go ahead and change the text to say you know, something relevant here. So let's do Flame Stereo. Let's also change the type of font here. Let's go in and use something like this, and let's change the size, and let's also give this some depth. And to make this make a little bit more sense, let's also switch to a 3-up view, where we'll put our schematic here, our result here, and then we'll put our working camera up to kind of help us visualize this a bit better. So let's go ahead and move that around. And we'll take our geometry, let's give this some depth, and we'll also move this in front of our back plate, and we can add a light into the scene, and we'll move that back pretty far. So we'll just kind of reorganize our views here a bit so we can see what's going on. And so you can see I can start to position this in front of my back plate, and you'll see that we've got the convergence is changing as I move that object around in 3D space. But what if I wanted this object to actually go behind this tree in our scene? Let's have a look at how we could handle that type of a challenge and do what we would traditionally do with Flame Compositing, but now do that in stereo. So let's go to our garbage mask tools, and with Shift S, we're going to bring out the garbage mask in stereo. And again, we're going to go ahead and pipe in the correct channels that we want. So we want to take the left and the right channels into our garbage mask. So now within the garbage mask tool, I'm going to add my shape around the bamboo. Right? So let's go ahead and close that up. Of course, with the garbage mask, we can break the points, create whatever shape we need. So here we're just going to make our our points go where we want them to be on this particular layer, and of course we're looking at the front of the left eye, but with shift and arrow we can toggle between our different eyes, right? So we've created one shape with our stereo garbage mask, but we need to make an adjustment between those two shapes because they're not lining up for the left and the right eye. It's working on the left eye, but the right eye is slightly off. So what's really great about these stereo enabled tools is if I go into the inside of that group, you can see what we really have is a construction where we're actually duplicating both of the objects for the left and the right eye. So what I can do is, going into duplicate mode, disable that particular duplication so that now I have an independent garbage mask for the right eye. And let's switch to viewing the right eye, and once I've done that, I can go in and just move my points to where I need them to be. So it's a subtle difference, but this is going to allow me to independently move my masks once they're created. So create them once and then basically unduplicate them so that you can make those subtle adjustments. And now if we look back and forth in our, let's exit our group, now we'll be able to see that we've changed the position for the left and the right eye. And we've got the mask where we need it to be for both of those layers. Back in action now, I'm going to add 2 more layers, and we're going to connect up for the front. We know it's going to be this, and the matte is going to be that layer. And then for our other layer, let's go ahead and connect up, whoops, wrong one. The other layer, the front, will be the right eye, and then of course the right eye mask coming out of the garbage. So let's go back to action and see where we are. Because I was using the auto add image, we've got the 2 images here again. So we're going to get rid of those, reselect those 2 layers, the left and the right eye, and we'll add them again under surfaces as a stereo object. Now when you're doing your compositing, you probably, your instinct is to go ahead and say, if I want to offset this layer in 3D space, I'm just going to introduce an axis, parent it to the layer, and start moving that forward in 3D and move that closer to the camera. And you can see as I do that, it's achieving the correct Z position, but what becomes really messed up is the convergence on that particular layer. You can see if I really exaggerate that in front of the camera, it's really changing the convergence, and that's not what I want to do. So let's go ahead and throw away that axis. What's great about the stereo objects is that built into this construction is the ability to compensate for any of the problems that you have with repositioning the layers in 3D space and automatically compensating for the convergence without having for me to move it and then adjust the convergence manually. I have tools to deal with that. So let's go ahead and turn on auto scale. And now as I move this forward in the Z position, you can see that in front of our working camera, it's automatically compensating and scaling that that particular element down correctly. So there's some math going on under the hood there to really change the textures without changing the convergence and reposition that to make some room for me to put some objects in between the foreground element and the background element. So that's really working great, and of course we're not adjusting our convergence at all. The other thing I can do, let's go ahead and move that up by an amount that makes sense, maybe by 500 units. And I'm going to push back my my other element, and I'm going to do that. And as I move that other element back, you can see that it's going back, but it's not scaling. So we'll go in and turn on auto scale for that image. And as I move it back, again in the center view, our stereo view, it's not changing at all. It doesn't change the convergence. It looks the same, but we're able to move it pretty far back away from the camera. So let's go ahead and push that back now. So in our working camera, you can see that we've got plenty of room now to start to position other objects between those 2 layers, but in our converged anaglyph view, nothing has really changed. So finally, let's go in and start to move our 3D object around. Let's give it some more depth so we can really see this pop out. And we'll start to move it around in the scene, right? So we can do that. We can rotate it as we want, and we got plenty of room now between the 2 objects to do that. And again, if I wanted to position that relative to my camera, I could turn a tool on called Auto, which will again move that back for me and allow me to place that anywhere in my scene to set the convergence anywhere that I want relative to the other objects. You can see now I've got that set up. I can kind of rotate that around, create a more dramatic sort of feel, and now we're going to have our stereo 3D text in front of or combined with our other stereo footage. So here we are in Flare, and we've launched back into the same project that the Flame was working on. We're going to go to the library now, and we'll go to our rule and connect over the gateway to the OpenEXR render passes that were generated in Maya. You can see that these are multi-channel OpenEXR files, and in the player we can play through the individual channels. Here we see the normals map. And now we're going to bring that left eye OpenEXR file, drag and drop that into our library. That's the left eye. We need to repeat that for the right eye. So the multi-channel EXR for the right eye can also be dragged and dropped into the library for the flare, which again is sharing the same project with the Flame. Those files can be loaded as an entire group to keep the left eye passes and the right eye passes separate, but at the same time together. And these groups can be edited. And in this case, the flare artist can jump very quickly through the various passes. You can see that we're able to move through the various passes and display those. So we've got a lot of renders here. And now we can start to do our work of pre-comping these layers together and then passing them back over to the Flame system for final finishing. Here we're going to go ahead and create an occlusion pass. And to do that, we're going to use some of the tools in the tool bin. And now we've created our occlusion pass in Flare. And we've got the various tools used to create negative and then recombine those using a logic ops. So we've got the occlusion pass created for both the left and the right eye. And now it's time to save this back for the Flame system to do the final finishing. So here's our scene. We can view that in anaglyph mode on the flare. And now we just need to give this a unique name and put this result of this pre-composition back into the project custom node bin to be picked up by the Flame system. So coming back from the flare now, we'd like to go back into Flame and pick up the pre-comp that was set up for us in the flare. All we need to do is go to the project bin for this particular project and pull out the setup that was saved there by the flare artist. So you can see here, if we look at the individual render passes, all of this was sort of pre-comped for me inside of Flare, which saves me an enormous amount of time. In terms of stereo finishing, the thing that makes the big advantage here in Flame is that, of course, just like in Flare, we can view in the linear color space, but instead of having to be restricted to the anaglyph viewing, we have a broadcast out of the Flame. So if we switch to the broadcast monitor option, I can switch to the dual output view now, and we can view both the left and the right eye. This allows us to do real-time stereo monitoring through the dual link of our system and actually look at everything in OpenEXR. Into the schematic view, I'm just going to select the background plate here, and what's really great now is I can start to play around with the convergence of this particular object. So I'm just going to move this back pretty far away from our car here, and you can see that we've now been able to reconverge that much further back in the scene. So this is the benefit of being able to view this real-time stereo monitoring in dual link. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is because we were provided with the normals map for this particular scene, we're able to do our relighting here in Flame. So here I'll introduce a light, and we're going to go into our scene a bit and just going to park where we see the car a bit more in the foreground. And notice that based on that normals map, we can actually go in and do our relighting. So we can start to play around with the intensity of the light and really change the exposure of the OpenEXR render passes from Maya. And again, Maya was able to produce these renders in stereo using the FPX camera that we also share with Flame. So that concludes this presentation of Creative 3D Finishing, and I appreciate you taking a look at the presentation. I hope you enjoy all the new features in Flame version 2011. There's so many to cover in this short amount of time, but I think that it really speaks to the hard work that's been done by our developers in Montreal, and we really appreciate all of you Flame customers out there. Don't forget that Flare really is a great addition to your Flame workflow, whether you're working in mono or stereo. And thanks for tuning in, and I hope to see you at the next demo. Thanks a lot.